Hello, Dr. Douglas. It's so nice to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
Thank you, Elijah. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Doing well,
Beautiful,
thank you.
beautiful. And you see, Dr. Douglas, oftentimes I love to thank my guests for two things. And I do this so often to the point where it has become my anthem. So, firstly, I want to say thank you so very much, Dr. Douglas, for investing in yourself. You see, you are on this platform right now because you did invested in yourself. And oftentimes, Doctor, I love to make reference to the amazing mango trip. They say some couple of months back, I was on a particular road, and just by the roadside, Dr. Douglas, there was this very tall, unattractive mango tree. And I used the word unattractive because the mango tree's got no mangoes on it, and the leaves are all dry. So I just walked past it and I went my way. But you see, Dr. Douglas, just recently, I was on that same road, and this time around, a lot's changed about the mango tree, you see. The mango tree caught my attention pretty good from a distance, and immediately I got the urge to move so close to it, of which I did, and it wowed me because now the mango tree's got a lot of mangoes on it, beautiful green leaves and healthy branches, and not just mangoes now, doctor. I'm talking about ripe mangoes. It was such a
Mm,
lovely experience that day, and I was so excited. There is my point. The fact that you dedicated your time, energy, and resources to becoming the amazing Dr. Douglas that you are today, that alone has made it impossible for me to skip you. And that's why you got the request from me to be on the show because I was attracted to the fruit of all that you're doing, your philosophies, your work, the impact your work is having, and how you are offering your solutions, doctor. These stuff's so beautiful. And just before I sent you that request, I said to myself, I've got to benefit from these beautiful things Dr. Douglas is doing. And not only me now, because, I don't want to look selfish and even with the audience. And here we are today with the amazing Dr. Douglas. So thank you so very much for doing that yourself. And secondly, thank you for saying yes to the invite. Because if you had said nope, there was nothing Elisha could do about it. Thanks so much, my man.
and thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that.
Was- Yeah, so let's get right into it. You see, I am quite excited to have you on the show today, Doctor, for some reasons. Firstly, my interest in knowledge seeking. I believe in order for one to transition from a terrible situation to that of a beautiful one, Doctor, I believe it takes the application of knowledge, quality information, and not just knowledge alone, but the application of it. And you see, Dr. Douglas, ever since I discovered that light in the Hebrew means knowledge and darkness ignorance. I've been so keen to knowledge seeking. Why? Because I do not want to remain in the dark. So that's going to make our conversation today very important to me and even to the listeners. And the second reason why I'm excited to have the incredible Dr. Douglas on the show is for the sake of the audience. They say, Doctor, we live in an age where information is as abundant as grains of sand. We've got lots of information flying out there. So these folks trust me for quality, high up man, and very important information, of which I am totally convinced, Doctor, that our conversation is going to be insightful and impactful. So, for that reason, Dr. Douglas, let's get started with your introduction. Talk to us about your personal or your professional journey, because right now we are so curious. We want to know how Dr. Douglas got here. And afterwards, I've gotten some beautiful questions for you. Okay, Doctor, over to you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, so I am a naturopathic doctor. I am practicing in San Diego, California, in the United States. I have been practicing going on 8 years now officially. And even in our doctorate program, which is a 4-year program, we're seeing patients even the first, second year. By the third, we're actually already primarying with patients under oversight of other doctors. long kind of road there with my focus always being really regenerative medicine. I've always really appreciated the body's ability to heal itself, its wisdom and its intelligence when you give it the right sort of substance, substrate, and signal. And that's sort of my philosophy kind of drives around that. And that's how I work with my patients. I look at, what is the terrain? What is the environment, right? What is the substrate is what I call it. What is the electricity of the body? What is the, environmental toxicity of the body? What is your ability on a cellular and genetic level? How to methylate, to detox, how to up or down regulate certain proteins or peptides. Even now there's a whole lot about peptides, and I actually kind of was working and dabbling a lot with that. There's, it's a big thing on the front of new medicine. Always been about regenerative medicine. I had a near-death experience about 20 years ago that really set me on this course. A car accident that the car had flipped a few times, and the roof was caved in. I'd snapped my neck, and I had two really badly herniated discs.
I'm sorry.
Well, I had a full near-death experience, and I was basically sort of given the option to return or go back home. And I realized that I had work here to do. And so I came back into my body, and the car it was amazing because it was on all four tires as if it just came to a gentle stop, except for it was completely total. There was car parts everywhere. The lights were blinking. Everything was smashed. And I was just gently placed back down. It was just this very amazing thing. Well, the next morning, I had all this adrenaline that night, so I didn't really feel much. The next morning, I could not move the left side of my body. I was paralyzed, numb, and on fire at the same time. So it was like electric fire. I was in 10 out of 10 pain. It hurt so bad I couldn't even cry. It was very, very miserable. And anyway, kind of long story short, I got to the ER. I had to get my mom to help me. They fast tracked me into the orthopedic surgeon's office, and they said I needed surgery, but I had too much intracranial pressure and they had to schedule it, et cetera. So they gave me 5 days, put me on the surgical schedule for a discectomy to take the discs out and replace them with resin composite discs, some kind of plastic composite, which would lead to, theoretically more surgeries. I mean, and this was 20 years ago. And so they're more elegant now to a degree. But, if you can avoid surgery, you really should, especially around the central nervous system, around the brainstem, around the neck, around the discs, et cetera, et cetera. When you're going under that and you're in that much pain, you're led to make really poor decisions. Kind of, hope is a dangling carrot, and there wasn't any option. They had no other option. I was like, is that it? He's like, yeah, well, it's surgery. That's it. Like, yeah, that's what you're doing. They gave me some muscle relaxers. They gave me some opiates, something like Tylenol, codeine, that kind of thing. And I was never really one to take pharmaceuticals. It kind of always made me feel sick or icky. It's just, I never really felt right from, most of that. And the diagnosis, I've never really liked that model where you just slap a name on something, this becomes sort of an identity. And right now we live in a time of really identity crisis, the way I see it. People are so far away from who they are, where they're coming from, and their genetic, right? And that's really in the code of life itself. And so, that led me to a curandera. My mom led me to a shaman, curandera from El Salvador, and she worked with me. She gave me a few vitamins. She gave me fish oil, vitamin C, and these green pills. I don't even know what was in it, but it was like spirulina and broccoli and, sprouts or something. And I asked her, how much do I take? She's, you just take as much as you can every couple hours. About every 3 hours, I was taking handfuls of this stuff. And it started to work. I started to feel a little bit better. I started to get some of the feeling and a little bit of rotation back. And the day before the surgery, so this was 4 days in a row, I just kept going to her. She got me on my stomach and adjusted my neck. And my pain at that point kind of was going down about 4 or 5 out of 10. And then it spiked and then it just disappeared. And everything started coming back like a foot when it falls asleep, and you're like waking up. The whole left side of my body was like that. So it really put me on this course of understanding, my gifts first personally, of what my ability to just heal myself and the innate wisdom, the intelligence that was there. And then I was really, dealing with that near-death experience, understanding the messages I was receiving, the, time without time, that, time is not this linear, A, B, C, this thing. It's this much broader multidimensional concept, and we just try to sort of label things, and when we want to box everything up into little units and fragments. But, so I got on this mission. I started researching, what they call alternative medicine, which I really dislike that term so much because it's not true. It's native medicine. What I practice is native medicine. It is natural as possible. We work with the body, using the intelligence of the body. And I mentioned sort of my philosophy. The substrate is the environment. The substance is the building blocks. You actually have to have the building blocks. You have to have cholesterol. You have to have proteins, right? There's a war against cholesterol. They want you to be on statin. They want every single person on the planet on a statin. And it's really contraindicated to life and thriving, especially in your later years when you need more hormones. Cholesterol builds your hormones. All of them are built off of cholesterol. Your vitamin D is built off of cholesterol. So they're telling, we're already have an identity crisis. Men have less testosterone, less hormones overall than their fathers did by about 40% of what their parents and their grandparents did. I mean, it is less than half, right? So biophysiologically, biochemically, the men these today are less than half the men that their fathers were. And it's an insane thing, but you see it in society. You see weaknesses. You see, people without discernment. You see, people living without consequence. And you can get toxicity in that regard for overcompensation versus being stable, sturdy, being able to discern, having that masculine and feminine and, yin yang dynamic
Yeah,
figured out
yeah.
within yourself and outside of yourself in a relationship. Right. And so, yes, I learned a lot, and I was all in. I went celibate for about 9 years. It was broken up a little bit, about 7 years, and then kind of took a little break and then went back to it for another couple of years. And, I was just focused. I knew that I'm on a mission, and this is just so important. And I know that the body can heal. And so now I work with stem cells. I work with the photobiomodulated plasma, which is using the plasma. So we do blood draws, extract out the plasma, and apply certain stressors like light and lasers that will activate the growth factors, the platelets, the potential of the stem cells within that. And it makes, it makes the systems that we target very, very, on the way to healing. We're not supposed to say cure, but it definitely regenerates that tissue. And my point is that it regenerates, and, we continue in a big way where, these things don't just by themselves, or they take very long time, and so thankfully I've, through that work, I've been able to learn about, how to inject, so I do regenerative injections locally. I use a lot of lasers, like I said, the plasma, and I've been able to help hundreds of people avoid
Uh-huh.
surgery, and that's been really kind of one of my MOs is, work with what you got best as you can. And sometimes, yeah, you might need the surgery, but I promise you it's some small percentage of those surgeries are actually necessary.
Hmm.
Couldn't tell you how
Small.
much, probably across the board, but it's a much smaller percentage that would actually be necessary. And often, there's multiple surgeries and one leads to another and leads to another, and
Yeah.
so the model, now is a sick care model. And I'm trying to, we build the wellness model, the optimum model of health, right? The how to thrive. And that's, that's the other part is the signal, right? The laser electricity, you have to get a hydroelectric. We are hydroelectric beings. You need electrons in your system. That's why alkalinity is important, right? Eating antioxidants, making sure you don't have a lot of what's called free radical stress, because the environment is very toxic. There's so much that we're swimming in this environment, and we have to have constant detox, constant movement in our body, moving lymphatics, and most doctors don't teach you this. They don't really tell you, kind of the basics of life. Because if you do these things, you get your vitamin D levels high, you get some sunshine, you get your bare feet on the earth, on the ground, you won't need half the medicines that they prescribe. Of course they don't tell you that, right? And a lot of times it's like people are deficient in magnesium.
Hmm.
They don't necessarily need an SSRI or some, heavy, brain chemical that'll affect your neurotransmitters and stuff like that. You're just deficient in a system, right? No one's deficient in SSRIs or opiates. No, we're not deficient in those things. But there's a whole host of minerals. And then you could talk about like parasites, right? Because in the first world, we think that there aren't any parasites, and yet everyone's walking around pretty much with parasites. And it's not one thing, it's everything. So yeah, I think the way I've learned to do it is to be as comprehensive as possible, as holistic as possible. Look at the full person, not just one diagnosis, not just one system, but what is going on. And we work with the emotional piece too. I've learned a lot about how the emotional piece really manifests into the physical form, and we call that sort of decoding, or, new medicine in the sense of psycho-emotional, sort of reframing or framework,
Hmm. Amazing.
updating.
I tell you, you've just exposed me to some very important information, and not just me, and even the listeners. The fact that you turned your pain into purpose. You mentioned that you give yourself to research and you were learning. That's amazing. So there's this part I'm curious about where you talk about our environment. So how does our environment affect us day to day?
Wow. That's so many ways, right? So many ways. So, there's environments within environments. There's like so many different ecosystems, right? We live in a universe that's technically holographic. There's different or fractal, if you will. There's smaller versions of everything. Like if you look at the electrons and the atoms, it looks a lot like outer space, right? And so all the way microscopically, macroscopically. But anyway, so, we're swimming in, microplastics. There's all kinds of, fluorochemicals, organophosphates, persistent chemicals in the environment. There's massive pesticides. Most of these things will affect hormones. They disrupt your microbiome, your gut flora. And that really is so important because that's the first line of defense against the outside world. That's sort of what separates you from the outside world, between your skin and your GI tract and your mucous membranes, and when you wreck your microbiome, when you're taking things like certain shots, certain, jabs, I won't say the V word, but, these things wreck your microbiome. They certainly, with the food, it's low quality, low nutrient status. In the United States, people, it's very disgraceful, the food that's on the market. People can go to Europe. You hear this all the time. They can eat all the gluten, all the bread, all the cheese. They lose weight. They feel fine. They come here, they eat it. They've got headaches. They feel bloated. They just are dialing themselves down by eating the diet itself. And then there's the water. The water, if you go to environmentalworkinggroup.org, EWG.org, you can type in your zip code, where you live, and it'll tell you all the chemicals, all the arsenic and the uranium and the cesium and all the stuff that's in your water. And it's just, there's residues of this in everything that you're doing. So there's so much in the environment that we're literally swimming in, on top of the fact that there's new things. I mean, we don't know what they're spraying in the skies. We have no clue, but they don't stop. And it's more and more every day, every minute, every hour, right? So they're just accumulating more and more. And so we're eating a poor diet. It's nutrient deficient. We're exposed to, I read this thing, and I don't know how accurate it is, so I don't want to necessarily state it as absolute, but people are eating microplastics every day. And the average, the idea is that maybe you're eating about a credit card's worth of plastic. So if you could visualize eating like a sheet of plastic every
Mm,
single day by the exposure of the water, the food, and then just poor detox, you're just accumulating. So many people are constipated. They're not going to the bathroom. They don't have good flow. And so they recirculate these toxins. Everyone should be sweating with some regularity, right? On some basic level, a couple times a week, because that is your detox organ. And, a lot of people don't sweat. They don't move their bodies. And so the internal environment is now, accumulating what the external environment has. And then I would talk about EMF, right? So I with my partner, founded a company to block EMF. So I'm actually wearing these scrubs here that I made, that we made, and it's made with real silver. And it actually physically blocks the electromagnetic frequencies, or EMF. And there's, or EMF is fields. There's a field effect from your Wi-Fi, from your phones, from all the towers, the 3Gs, the 4Gs, the 5Gs. Like, all these things are constantly zapping us all day. We're swimming in that. People who work in hospitals and clinics in particular, so the frontline, the people who are supposed to be helping you regenerate and heal, they're exposed to this. So their dials are turned down. It's cellular stress. It creates oxidative stress. It can affect, certain signaling of cells, calcium channel, things like that. It certainly can affect fertility. The closer you have it to your breasts, ovaries, or testicles, it's going to affect that fertility. We already know that. And it's not so much about cancer. And there are some cases that, we certainly can see where people who are putting their phones all the time, they might develop tumors there.
mm,
They might, I've seen people who are always wearing these Bluetooth, and they wonder why they have a, parotid gland tumor on that side. And it's not just one thing, it's the whole environment, because then we have, viruses in the environment. We have other things that, other bugs and parasites, as I mentioned before, that are in the food that we neglect. We don't have anti-parasite protocols. There's no regular, like, hey, every, once a month you take your ivermectin or whatever that may be, or here's some herbs. So people are largely ill-equipped, swimming in a toxic soup. They're spraying stuff. The EMF is everywhere. I'm trying to find solutions, as you mentioned. Thank you for, mentioning that, because I make the scrubs. We call it Silverware, SLVRWEAR, silverware.com. And we make blankets, hats, cell phone pouches for your cell phone. A lot of
uh,
people are sleeping right next to their cell phones, next to their brain. And so that causes all kinds of stress, and it heats up the tissue, right? That is not sustainable. That is not a good idea. We need to protect ourselves and be more aware of these environmental stressors. We get good detox pathways. If you can get Faraday cages, if you want to buy some of my products, that would be great. But the point is that we're trying to protect people. We want people to walk with armor and be confident, and not just be like the frog in the boiling water that just slowly feels sluggish and worse. And you don't notice it, because it's still kind of
yeah.
gradual. right? But most people are operating at 80% or less. I mean, it's a couple of IQ points. It's a couple of energy, just levels of energy lower and lower. And you don't really realize. And it's sad if you think about it. Most people aren't as sharp as they were, but pre-COVID.
Yeah,
That's and
tell you.
you try to get stuff. See it in the environment when you try to get things done. People aren't on their stuff as like they used to. And maybe there's more distractions in the environment. That's another, right? We're always on the screen.
Mm,
We get in the blue light. Other distractions. And so that, affects your sleep and your hormonal regulation, right? So there's all these cascade of, of events and, these domino effect of things. So yeah, you got to be diligent in your battles and, there's a lot of really low hanging fruit. Like I mentioned, protect yourself, turn your cell phone on airplane mode, just keep it 6 feet away from your brain and your heart and your sexual organs. There are blankets you can buy. There's different things you can look at. And we test all of our stuff. So all of our stuff is probably the best on the market. If you're looking at the scientific testing, we've tested up 99.99% up
mm,
against 50 gigahertz, which nothing that I've seen that we found on the market can even do that. So
amazing, amazing. I tell
yeah.
you.
And we're coming from a scientific background, right? We're not, we're not just slapping some stuff together. I'm very thoughtful about this and try to be as
Tell you that.
supportive. I'm obviously biased to doctors, nurses, and clinicians, and frontline workers, because those, we're we're all on the same team. We're the people trying to help everyone
Yeah,
in this time. We're sicker now than ever.
I tell you, man, it's pretty sad. I tell you, I mentioned earlier that knowledge is light. What you just shared now, I tell you, it just illuminated the whole place for me, especially the part of the mobile device. I tell you, this stuff is very important. So I'm going to take that as a final thought. So for folks who would like to reach out to you, Dr. Douglas, make a purchase of your wonderful product or even ask you questions, how can that be possible?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, I have as I mentioned, it's silverware.com. It's SLVRWEAR.com. Also, we have silverscrubs.com for the medical stuff, and that's SILVER scrubs, SCRUBS.com. I also have my practice. It's Optimum Wellness Natural, all one word, optimumwellnessnatural.com. And you can look at some of the work that I do with the plasma and the stem cells and peptides and a lot of foundational stuff too. I mean, I still highly believe in the fundamentals. And so, happy to work with people and kind of, wherever they're at and meet them and try to optimize people and arm them as much as possible.
Beautiful.
It is a battle. It is a battle out here. Be wise to protect ourselves.
Yeah, that's it. Be wise to protect yourself. So that's going to be the end of the show, Dr. Douglas. Thank you for coming and thank you for sharing this wonderful stuff with us. It means a whole lot to me, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Elijah. Appreciate you. Thank you.